Fox News alert, President Trump is doubling down yet again on his criticism of the special counsel investigation. He says it's now been discredited after a newly released FBI document reveals information the agency used to justify surveillance of a former Trump campaign aide during the 2016 presidential campaign. And on we go. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, host of the Evening Edit on the Fox Business Network. Elizabeth McDonald, don't miss it. Democrat strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov. And joining us in the center seat, Fox News media analyst, host of Media Buzz, and author of Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth, Howie Kurtz is outnumbered. Nice to see you. You're silent.
Oh, is this where I chime in?
He has good manners.
Wow. And we're the media.
It's good to be outnumbered.
Thanks. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
All right, let's get to the news. It is the document that so many have been waiting for after House Republicans tried for months to secure its release. The FBI has released the application it submitted to a secret court, the Fisa court, to get permission to start surveilling the Trump campaign aide, Carter Page. The heavily redacted document, we now know, reveals the infamous Trump dossier compiled by a former British spy, Christopher Steele, which was a central part of the FBI effort. President Trump tweeted this. So now we find out that it was indeed the unverified and fake dirty dossier that was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC that was knowingly and falsely submitted to FISA, and which was responsible for starting the totally conflicted and discredited Mueller witch hunt. Exclamation point. House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte also slammed the FBI's use of that dossier to obtain the warrant. Watch it.
We certainly learned that there is a serious problem with the FBI presenting to the FISA court an application for a search warrant against a United States citizen, and then followed by 3 renewals when they were basing it on a very flawed document, the so-called Steele dossier that has never been verified. Even after all of this came out, they attempted to verify it and failed.
Flip sides, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, firing back, saying the documents bolster arguments that the FBI had legitimate concerns about Page's activities and ties to Russia.
No, those applications set out in some detail, a lot of which unfortunately is redacted, just why the FBI was so concerned that Carter Page might be acting as an agent of a foreign power. And let's remember, that application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words in a letter I think you asked him about, in which Carter Page acknowledged being an informal advisor to the Kremlin.
And now, for the first time, we are seeing the letter Republicans on the House Intel Committee sent to the White House last month, calling on President Trump to declassify and make public key parts of the Carter Page FISA application, saying, quote, the committee's investigative findings include DOJ's and FBI's use of an unverified dossier of memoranda that was not subjected to proper U.S. government verification and was not handled according to FBI procedures because DOJ and FBI continued to obstruct the committee's investigation. It is time to put the facts in the public domain. Howard Kurtz, is it time?
I think there is a huge partisan fight over this document that is a little down in the weeds for a lot of average people. And the reason, if we looked at this document now, there's so many redactions, it looks like a chunk of Swiss cheese. But here's what we've learned. We've learned that this warrant was approved by 4 Republican-appointed judges. We learned the FBI believed that Carter Page was targeted for recruitment by the Russians. He said yesterday on CNN he was an informal advisor to the Kremlin. I'm not sure I see the distinction. And we learned that the FBI did tell this special court that the person who didn't name her, or DNC, had paid for this dossier, was trying to injure Trump's campaign. So it wasn't like it went unnoticed.
So, to answer my question in transparency, you call it down in the weeds, but what does the public need to know at this point? Because if it's so heavily redacted, what are we learning?
Well, we're learning that both sides will take the same pieces of paper and argue about it. I'd love to see the whole thing, but there are national security concerns, and that's why so much of this has been cut out, which makes it hard to reach a definitive conclusion.
Jessica, you know, from the Democrats' point of view on this, you may have heard Trey Gowdy say that if there were evidence of any kind, of certain kinds, then that Adam Schiff would have leaked it by now. But are we so down in the, as Howard is suggesting, so down in the political weeds that there's not much substance there for the American public to grab onto?
I think there are top-line findings, which is what Howie laid out there, that are incredibly important for the American public to see. I think with the redactions, the difficulty becomes, for instance, if you take, the fact that the Republicans were arguing that the Steele dossier was the sole basis for the Fisa warrant. It's clear from the redactions that it was not.
Said that once.
Oh, the main base.
Nobody ever said that once.
Well, let's just say that it was part of it, and it was a big part of it.
Chairman Goodlatte even said in his interview.
That way we don't have to say all. Let's get the superlatives out of it.
Either way, when there are redactions after that, that complicates things. So it would be good to see what else there were. When we talk about Michael Isikoff's reporting, for instance, for Yahoo, which has now been exposed that it wasn't about circular reporting, but rather to quote Carter Page in 2016 when he declined to verify a story that he was in Moscow at a certain time. Those are things that we should have more information about, but the national security reasons are paramount.
Can we just talk about Carter Page for just a moment?
Yes, please.
I mean, there's been a lot of pushback from the White House and others saying that his role, if any, was very small. He calls himself an informal.
I love that. That always means I'm hanging around the fringes and no one has asked me to be here and no one's paying me and I'm just an informal advisor here. I have no real role. Carter Page, I mean, it was best said that he's more Inspector Gadget than Jason Bourne. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to him talk and you watch these interviews that he's doing, he doesn't have a lot of credibility. I mean, he seems like he's kind of all over the place.
Seems to like being on TV, though.
Seems to like being on TV. I can understand why if he has a meeting with anyone, it would raise suspicion. At the same time, he's been on the radar for a really long time. Yeah. And the fact that he's hanging around the hoop at the Trump campaign as well, I don't know. I mean, I would dispute some of Jessica's facts in the idea that, so the Fisa warrant, it mentions in every single place this dossier, which we know was paid for by the opponent and didn't prove out to be true. And those Yahoo stories were circulated by the same people that created the dossier. So it seems like if they didn't need the dossier, it wouldn't be listed everywhere over and
it was
over
unverified,
again.
right? So that's the issue, too. And I'm afraid, Harris, we're going to get into these hyper-technical terms that'll bog the debate down. I mean, let me back up. Senator Marco Rubio, to Melissa's point, has said Carter Page was on the radar screen for a long time before the Trump campaign. And he was sort of hanging around as a consultant with the shingle hanging out. But the senator also said this doesn't mean there was spying on the campaign. There certainly was unmasking of Trump campaign officials, the names in intel sources by all sorts of Obama-era officials. I think your question is a good one. Do we need to learn more? Should the American people see more? Should we be more transparent?
I want to jump in with a couple of things if we can, and I'll come right back to you, Elizabeth. So the president tweeted today, so President Obama knew about Russia before the election. Why didn't he do something about it? I don't know if we can stick this. There it is up on the screen. Why didn't he tell our campaign? Because it is all a big hoax. That's why. And he thought crooked Hillary was going to win.
Well, it's unclear. I mean, the term hoax is problematic in light of what intelligence is already saying about Russian meddling in the campaign. Should we wait for Mueller's report, let him finish it? Yes. Is it unreasonable to say it's a witch hunt? Likely, yes. I mean, because was there evidence of collusion? We don't see that right now. Should we let the Mueller probe play out? Yes. I don't know how long it's going to take. That's a problem, I think, for a lot of people.
Former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Andrew McCarthy from Fox earlier. Watch this.
The big problems that I think people are going to have with this is that there's a lot of things in national security where the government has to be able to look you in the eye and say, trust us. FISA is exactly that, because you never get disclosure of it. And what people are going to wonder is if they did that in this case, how rampant is the problem? How much do they push the envelope because they know no one's ever going to check their work?
All right, so irrespective of party, that's an excellent question because, it's always been the secret court. So if we begin to even peel, even with redactions, a bit of that process back, should we then naturally be curious, has this happened before? Have there been things that have been used to get warrants before that this court has looked at that we might want to dig deeper into and make sure it was
And it's hard to judge because it has been so surrounded by secrecy, and at the same time, we want to know if this was outrageous or not, but it's unanimously 4 judges. I was really struck yesterday by Trey Gowdy, Republican congressman, saying top Trump national security officials should resign, because it's been liberal pundits have been saying that. You know, John Bolton should resign, and Mike Pompeo should resign.
And why should they resign?
And Ivanka should resign as his daughter, because the idea is that if you don't like Donald Trump's national security policies, even his handling of the Mueller investigation or his handling of Vladimir Putin, you should resign as a matter of conscience. The fact is, the people who work for him, when they may disagree at points, are trying to push him and the government in a good direction. I think it's kind of a cheap shot.
I want to
Should the American public then resign, just real quickly? Because if you look at the polling, they're supportive of the president. I mean, that the polling numbers
not on
the policy is.
issue, though.
Well, even during the Helsinki summit, before and after, they were still supportive of his
and his approval numbers are bumping up. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
I think we're going to get to that in a bit, but come back to the Fisa warrant and all the redactions that are on there. I think people keep saying, why doesn't the president just release it in full? We have seen in the past that when we take these redactions off, that lately they've been embarrassing to the top echelon of the FBI. I actually think the president is trolling all the Democrats, and that the longer this FISA thing goes on, and then that the more suspicious, most people, especially on his side, get of this process. And in the end, when you peel it back and you see those embarrassing things, it's an
aha moment. Right? Real quickly, let's get to Sarah Sanders, press secretary, on this very issue.
The president would like this to operate independent of him, but he certainly has asked for the Department of Justice to be transparent in this process. And if there are questions, which clearly there remain to be some, we hope that they'll step up and help answer those questions.
All right, Elizabeth?
Your point's well taken that this FISA court, stepping back and looking at it, is extra constitutional. I mean, do we want this as a precedent-setting place to go if you want to find out what's going on in your opponent's political campaigns? That's how the American people, in many respects, see it.
Isn't it a check and balance to have to go to judges and not just be able to?
Secret judges? I don't know. It just feels
they do
so
a lot more than
transparent.
just warrants for campaign spying.
Understood, but it can be used for that.
Yeah, but there are really 2 issues here, and I know that if Kennedy were here, she would be super into the other side of this, because we talk about Mueller all the time, but in terms of the invasion of privacy of Americans and what our government can do in terms of spying on them without cause, it appears now, since the Carter Page FISA warrant was renewed 3 or 4 times, that there was good cause, and he himself has bragged about being this informal.
It's the same documents that are used again and again.
Yeah. So I mean, if you didn't find problem with it the first time,
but that doesn't mean that Carter Page's contacts with the Russians stopped. That doesn't mean that Carter Page stopped talking to those people or bragging about the fact that he was a, quote, informal advisor to the Kremlin versus a formal advisor.
I want to step in with just a quick question to you, Howard, because you were the first to bring up the 4 GOP-appointed court judges. And I assume you brought that up because we were talking about separating the political shaft from everything else. So how does that play?
Well, I think if it had been mostly Democratic appointees, it would be a talking point for President Trump and his allies to say, see, this is the deep state and that sort of thing. The fact that these are judges happen to be appointed by previous Republican presidents suggests to me that they're not just, I guess there's a question.
They could be never-Trumpers. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that it matters one way or the other. We're talking about a secret
court. Well, hopefully they're judges who take this super secret stuff so seriously that they don't let partisan politics enter into it in deciding the very awesome power of using government surveillance against someone like Carter Page. I just think he's a bad poster boy because he did have contacts with the Russians, and of course the Bureau was suspicious.
It's more telling that they rubber stamp everything that comes their way, the secret court. I mean, the percentage of times that they approve these warrants is, 99%? Yeah. I mean, that's what's telling. It's not political.
Were there any
important
others?
To tell the angry Democrats that the president rants about all the time.
13, actually.
Sorry, 13 angry Democrats, and, that Judge Curiel can't even be unbiased, for instance, because of party affiliation.
But the overarching question, Jessica, I think we can look at is, were there other instances like this where political bias from one side or the other allowed for FISA application to be rubber stamped, as you said, most of the time? I mean, that's when one side weaponizes a process against another side, it doesn't matter which side is doing that. We need to know.
No, we absolutely do, but I don't see how this was the weaponization of the FISA court process here. If it were 4 judges, and Judge Roberts has been stacking the FISA court, which is with his prerogative.
The escalating war of words as President Trump puts Iran on notice. Threaten the U.S. and face historic consequences. Why this may signify a big shift in U.S. policy? We'll see. Plus, progressive heroes Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, progressive heroes or socialists, say their agenda is now the Democratic mainstream. And that draws a warning shot from some moderate Democrats. Stay close.
New fallout over President Trump's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki 1 week ago today. As lawmakers continue to weigh in, the president has since invited Putin to Washington this fall. Now House Oversight Chairman Trey Gowdy saying Trump administration's officials should consider quitting if the president won't listen to their advice on Russia. Watch.
The president has access to every bit of evidence, even more than those of us on House Intel, and Will and I serve on Intel. He has access to Pompeo and Chris Wray and Dan Coates and Nikki Haley. The evidence is overwhelming. It can be proven beyond any evidentiary burden that Russia is not our friend and they tried to attack us in 2016. So the president either needs to rely on the people that he has chosen to advise him, or those advisors need to reevaluate whether or not they can serve in this administration. But the disconnect cannot continue.
Meantime, a new Washington Post ABC News poll shows 50% disapprove of President Trump's performance during the Putin summit and 33% approve. Howie, this is a mess. I mean, how does it just continue on and on and on? Put a button on it, move on.
Well, the Helsinki press conference did hurt President Trump,
Without
including
question.
with many conservatives, but not with Republicans. When you drill down, you see that he still has that rock-solid support. So every media freak out, well, this is the controversy that's going to sink him, often turns out not to be the case. Now, when Trey Gowdy saying people should resign, part of that is fueled by, there was an interview, live interview last week from Aspen with Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, who didn't even know, was told on the air that the president had invited Putin to Washington this fall. So people saying, well, he's not even keeping them in the loop. You know what? They're all staff. There was one person whose name was at the top of the ballot. His name was Donald J. Trump. If they truly feel like they can't get anything done, they have the option of leaving, but none of them seem to be doing that.
So why is it the answer to get people to quit their jobs in the middle of something? I mean, it's been hard enough for this administration to fill the positions. I mean, they've needed some Democrats and in confirmation situations to be able to get that done. So you've got high-level people in those positions. We saw back with the travel ban. The president isn't likely going to loop in everybody when he's ready to move. That is his style. He told us that was going to be his style. I don't, it may not be within everybody's comfort zone, but the answer is to quit? I don't understand that.
Well, it's in part because of a concern about leaks. You tell 3 people in Washington, next thing you know, it's on the AP wire.
Good point.
But, it's a political maneuver. It's like they can't kind of scratch the presidential Teflon. So it's like, well, the people around him should just quit. They shouldn't put up with this because he's not listening.
And you think that will change his behavior, I guess is my question.
Absolutely not. There's been
That's his leadership
there's
style.
been a lot of turnover in this White House, and he, if anything, compared to last year, is doubling down on doing what he thinks is best, even if staff disagree.
Jessica?
I think that there's a difference between looping in and taking advice. And Trey Gowdy was talking there about actually taking the advice. Like, you've gone out of your way to stock your administration with the best people that are available to you. So you have people who certainly know what they're talking about in John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. I have a very different worldview than them, but I wouldn't dispute the fact that they know what they're talking about. And I think the frustration for those Republicans who are not cool with the approach to Russia and certainly were upset by the Helsinki press conference, but probably much more than that's gone on, is that he doesn't even take the advice on board and makes a decision on his own. Like, I want Vladimir Putin to come before the midterms. No Republican, and I should also note, Trey Gowdy's name isn't on the ballot again come November. It's very different. I don't know what he would be saying if he was running for re-election.
I mean,
a lot of the people who are speaking out are getting very bold now that they're going home to write a book.
Tom Bolster, former Homeland Security Advisor to President Trump, made an important point that he's seeing, evidently, that the Russians are reporting back to their people agreements that may run counter to U.S. policy. So I hear your point. We don't want the good guys in the administration just to quit to make a statement. We probably need them there.
But they should be used for their skills.
Understood.
Okay. Yeah.
Democrats divided over the direction of their party, with more mainstream members pushing back against a revolt from the far left. How this could impact the party ahead of the midterms, that's next.
People believe that health care is a right. People believe we should raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and we have got to fight for an America that works for all of us, not just the 1%.
2 years ago, we were both in St. Mary's Park in the South Bronx. I was in the crowd. To be here 2 years later pushing that revolution in Kansas is pretty amazing.
That was former candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, and his former protege, New York congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as they hit the trail in Kansas. They were campaigning for a like-minded House candidate there. Meanwhile, in Ohio, a group of moderate Democrats organized a first-of-its-kind convention to talk about pushing back against the energy and momentum of the socialist tide inside their party. Former Delaware Governor Jack Markell sounded the alarm for Democrats, reportedly saying, quote, "The only narrative that has been articulated in the Democrat Party over the past 2 years is one from the left. Frankly, it would have been better to start the conversation earlier," end quote. Well, it's been going on for a while. Hillary Clinton saw that left flank just reach up and grab her. So this isn't exactly new. But where is the Democrat Party going before November? Because this is a hot mess.
Well, the Democrats have a legitimate problem, the mainstream Democrats, and that is all the energy is in the progressive left. It's pushing the party to the left, and you win elections in the middle. But there's a media dimension to this. Media have made this 28-year-old woman who won one low-turnout primary in Queens and the Bronx, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, into the face of the party. She gets so much publicity. She goes out with Bernie. There are front-page stories. If this was a Republican who came out of nowhere and started making the mistakes that she was making, the press would be all over her. But she's getting a pass.
You mean not knowing Middle East politics?
Not knowing the first thing about
basics?
Israel occupying Palestine. Oh, I don't really know much about foreign policy. Let's occupy the airports until we shut ICE down. She is going off in her own direction, and to the extent that anybody identifies that with people who are trying to win races in swing states or red states, that is a bad look for the Dems.
I disagree, because I think that this feels very Trumpy to me. I mean, it's become a cult of personality in politics. He made a ton of mistakes, obviously, and overcame them because people who supported him felt like they knew where he was coming from and liked the personality, liked the energy, that he was totally different.
She's not a national candidate, and she's sadly everybody else.
I think the Democrats are better off leaning into somebody who has some spark to them. And there could be Bernie Sanders.
But her ideas, like guaranteed jobs or guaranteed income, have collapsed economies. Finland pulled the plug on guaranteed income. Let me back up. It is stunning that the Democrats have let socialism go full career in their party.
Well, they tried to stop it.
Right, it used to be that McGovern and Mondale were hard left. I mean, Ted Kennedy and Schumer voted for the 86 tax cuts. It's really stunning that this is going on.
Set us straight, Jessica.
I don't think that this has gone as far as the media is hyping this up. And yes, progressive candidates have done well, or Democrat socialist candidates, but if you look at the portion of them, I think it's only 6. And at the end of the day, Democrats are running local elections, which is why they're doing so well. I mean, we saw that certainly in Virginia, New Jersey.
There are 42 socialist candidates
on the ballot.
20 states and federal, state, and local
on the ballot.
But
anyone can run. I mean,
fact checking. Sorry.
Well, on the ballot, that's fine, but I mean, Republicans, there's a guy who's running who is like a Nazi. So I don't think we want to be talking about just who's showing up on the ballot. We're talking about who's actually winning. Well, anyway, the point is that meeting in Ohio took place because there is a fissure within the party, not necessarily because of numbers, but because of influence. And Bernie Sanders has a massive influence because of the social network that he has built. Can I just step in for 1 second, though? When
Bernie Sanders had the mantle, you had Wasserman Schultz over at the DNC working against him. And, it cost her position, but you had opposition already within your party to his socialist bent. It was a problem then. It remains a problem now. What will you do about it?
Well, I think that people will continue to run local elections. Yes, the party has been shifted.
But they're running her out all over the country.
They are running her out all over the country, and it's detrimental. And she's also putting up false facts about her own election, saying that she won all Democrats, but she didn't do well with African American voters.
Hold on 1 second, Matt, because I heard you say earlier, Joe Crowley, could he step back into this race in New York?
Well, he can. I mean, not that anyone listens to Joe
He's still
Lieberman.
On the ballot.
He's still on the ballot. I mean, her race was 26,000 people. She did badly with African American voters, which is exactly what happened to Bernie Sanders. Hillary won by 4 million votes. She overwhelmingly won black voters. And Bernie Sanders and the progressive left does not do well with them, and they're widely understood to be the most informed voters in the Democrat Party as well. And she says she won them all, and she didn't.
Oof. All right. Sounds like a fight to me, but... Yeah. I just see him. President Trump may be at war with the mainstream media, but his poll numbers keep going up. Howie Kurtz is here to talk about this. I can't wait, especially among his base, where it is at near historic levels. Howie, on it. Stay with us. Fox News alert, the fallout now after newly released FBI documents reveal the anti-Trump dossier played a key role in investigators' push to obtain surveillance on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. It happened during the height of the 2016 campaign. The president today tweeted, "So we now find out that it was indeed the unverified and fake dirty dossier that was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC, that was knowingly and falsely submitted to Fisa, and which was responsible for starting the totally conflicted and discredited Mueller witch hunt!" But Democrats say the documents show that the surveillance of Page was justified and accuse Republicans of trying to undermine the Mueller probe. Watch.
No, those applications set out in some detail, a lot of which unfortunately is redacted, just why the FBI was so concerned that Carter Page might be acting as an agent of a foreign power. And let's remember that application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words.
Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the latest. Catherine?
Thanks, Harris. Good afternoon. Though heavily redacted, the 412 pages indicate that the Steele dossier was a major component of the October 2016 surveillance warrant application for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. It also shows the dossier was a major component in the subsequent renewals. Based on what's visible, the dossier is not described to the Fisa court or the surveillance court as a political document, as the Democrats have asserted. Rather, the FBI speculates to the Fisa court that it was commissioned to damage candidate one, who is Donald Trump. The FISA records show a September 2016 Yahoo News article about Carter Page and allegations he was a Russian operative is also a significant part of the application. But Republicans emphasize the Yahoo News report was not a separate stream of intelligence, but rather had the same source as the unverified dossier. Democrats and Republicans exchanged some harsh words on the Sunday talk shows.
We'll never know whether or not the FBI had enough without the dossier, the unvetted DNC-funded dossier, because they included it. And everyone who reads this FISA application sees the amount of reliance they placed on this product funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC.
No, of course not. And I think actually if the performance that we had in Helsinki took place before those applications were filed, I think that whole interchange with Putin would have been a central exhibit in the FISA applications.
Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee asked President Trump last month to declassify key sections of the surveillance warrant applications. That's the documents that were released over the weekend about Carter Page, according to this letter obtained by Fox News. The letter also states that on its face, it does appear the Bureau's reliance on the dossier conflicts with the Bureau's own internal and strict rules. Harris.
Catherine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This very man, before the commercial break, I told you, a key and important player in all of this. We're glad to get him today. And getting those documents released, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Tom, I just want to pause and tell our audience that the journey to get to this point has been long and winding through FOIA requests and so much pressure and work by your team at Judicial Watch. So they're heavily redacted. How surprised or concerned are you about what facts we can see because of all of the redactions?
Well, it's sufficient enough to, what's public is sufficient to draw conclusions that there was corruption in the FISA court process. The DOJ and the FBI misused this Clinton DNC dossier, referred to it 3 times in different ways without telling the court directly, as I call it, a self-licking ice cream cone, and to spy on the Trump team, an extraordinary step by the FBI and DOJ, and it was done without verifying, despite what the document says that it was verified. It wasn't verified. So there are people that need to be held to account for misleading the court. And the other interesting thing is we have to remember this FISA warrant, one of them, the renewals, was issued during the term initially of Mueller's special counsel operation. So the Mueller team has benefited from this illicit FISA application targeting the team of Donald Trump. And so there are real issues about not only the corruption during the Obama administration, but the corrupt use of that document to benefit the Mueller team.
Yeah, corruption is a legal word. I mean, it's not like they finagled or, or were extremely careless or some other words that might not be legal. So what is the course ahead in all of this?
Well, there's more in the application that needs to be declassified. The reason we're able to see these records is because the president declassified this material related to Carter Page in response to Devin Nunes and the Intelligence Committee's request earlier this year. That led to the disclosure of this portion of the FISA application. He needs to do additional declassifications to show what else is in there. Look, there's enough here to raise significant questions about not only how this court was, the courts were abused in this FISA court process, but whether they were abused in other FISA warrants, and just how the whole thing is working generally in terms of allowing this secret process to take place, where we're supposed to be relying on the good faith of the government to be honest and forthright with the courts. That didn't happen here.
Yeah, you know, the words that really stood out to me, you said this court was misled. And it does lead you to wonder, well, how often has that happened? Let's just put all of the details of this particular case aside. How often does a secret court get misled and we never find out about it? Here is former U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy, and then I'll get your thoughts, Tom.
The judges obviously relied overly, it appears, on the FBI. They trusted that they were following their procedures and they weren't exacting enough. I wasn't saying that the judges should be kicked off the bench, but I think they ought to be asked hard questions. I mean, to me, I look at this application and it's appalling. Right. Yeah, and I don't understand how a judge would. I think if I gave this warrant when I was a prosecutor to a judge down the street in Manhattan, I'd have got my head cut off.
Tom, is any of this complicated at all by the fact that those 4 judges were GOP appointed, or does that not matter?
No, it doesn't matter. They took the government's word at face value, which was a mistake. The judges should be asking themselves whether they need to ask more questions of the DOJ and FBI in the future. You know, we have a law enforcement folks that work with us, and they told us that they would have needed more information than was required here just to get a subpoena for a crack house. The idea that they relied on this garbage, and it is garbage, it's DNC Clinton anti-Trump propaganda, even worse, used or gathered with the help of Russia intelligence, according to the Fusion GPS people. It's laundered into the FBI and DOJ to spy on the Trump team. And when you look at these documents, Harris, it's about Donald Trump and the campaign. Carter Page is a pretext and a vehicle for getting at the Trump campaign. It's a real crisis that the FBI and DOJ was doing this, and they're still unapologetic about it. And there's an ongoing special counsel investigation that's still benefiting from this corruption.
Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch bringing forth a huge effort to get those documents unveiled, if you will, even though they're heavily redacted, in terms of that secret FISA court, which we are all learning more about. Tom, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Back to one of Fox's top stories. President Trump going after the Mueller investigation after the FBI released those new documents related to the surveillance warrant on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page during the 2016 campaign. The president said the documents make it appear his campaign was illegally spied on. But Democrats say they show evidence of Russia's coordination with Carter Page. The Power Panel now. Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media. Tiffany Cross, co-founder and managing editor of the Beat DC. Great to see you both. Kevin, I want to start with you. We had on Tom Fitton just a few minutes ago from Judicial Watch. A key and important component to at least those 412 pages coming forth, even though they're heavily redacted. Your thoughts?
Well, regardless of what Nancy Pelosi said this morning in her tweet, you've got the Devin Nunes report and you've got the heavily redacted FISA application, and it appears that the application makes the Nunes report look quite accurate. And I think that's going to be problematic because they didn't overstate the case. They said this was the way they went about it, and it looks as though the application is consistent with that. And if that's the case, then most of the case was built around the dossier, not Papadopoulos. The narrative is all whack, and it shows that there was a willingness by FBI and DOJ officials to lie to an actual empowered court. Not once, but a few times, and I think that's problematic.
Yeah, just for those people just tuning in and maybe they don't have Papadopoulos at the tip of their tongue, he was a player in all of this that could have been looked at according to Democrats. But what this shows is that consistency of looking at that anti-Trump dossier. You know, Tiffany, what problems do you think there are with gathering that kind of information that was paid for by the Democratic Party, the DNC in part, the Hillary Clinton campaign? Any party that would pay for opposition material like that and then it being used to get a FISA warrant to spy on the other team?
Well, I just want to set a few facts straight. First, on the payment, it was first paid for by the conservative outlet Washington Free Beacon. But on the actual FISA documents, one, these warrants weren't issued until after Carter Page left the campaign. Two, Carter Page was already gone from the campaign by the time he was surveilled. So there was no spying. There was investigating. That's not spying. Three, the fact that 4 Republican-appointed judges kept introducing this and approving the warrants repeatedly says that there was some information. And now, for whatever reason, the tactic seems to be let's attack the judges and let's attack the law enforcement agencies that are trying to protect this democracy. I don't understand it.
Kevin? No, that's almost none of that's accurate. And the point is not the judges. The judges were lied to. They were told that there was validating evidence coming from the press outlets. And what they relied upon was a press outlet that had reported on the story that was originally originated from the same people that produced the dossier. So you had
circular reporting, as they call it.
And that was supposedly reinforcing. And it would be okay if they had said to the judge, this is a report that depends on the dossier's evidence to make its claims, but they didn't do that. They lied to the judge. The judge, on some level, is very innocent here. He's just being presented the evidence that he has. He has to make the decision based on what they tell him. It was the FBI officials and the DOJ people that were making the case that was the problem, not the judges
themselves. But what part is inaccurate? I mean, Carter Page wasn't surveilled while he was on the Trump campaign, so there was nobody spying on the Trump campaign.
The dossier has been largely debunked and not proven in the major findings that it has.
But what initiated this was them looking at George Papadopoulos in October 2016. The dossier wasn't...
The FISA application makes it clear that the dossier was the lead piece of evidence and that Papadopoulos played almost no role in it whatsoever. The Nunez report has been vindicated today.
Big picture this for me, because I know that the two of you could go back and forth on this. So what Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch says, and you use a stronger word, he says that the judges were misled. And they did look at it more than once. You're right about that, Tiffany, but they're looking at basically the same information 3 or 4 times.
The same people
right?
coming back saying it still counts.
Yeah. So big picture for the American people, what's the takeaway?
Well, I think that there's been 2 competing narratives on what started this look into and turned into the special counsel investigation. This seems to justify the House Intelligence Committee and the other committee. It seems to justify their statement that this was not done on legitimate grounds. And so I think you're going to have greater questioning of the Mueller investigation going forward by people that want to know what the truth is.
But I would imagine most people are in agreement that the reason that we got a special counsel was because James Comey was no longer in position. I mean, that played a role, too.
Partly, but you still had Comey and all the rest of the gang of whoever that was there making that case with this debunked or yet to be proven information going before a judge saying, oh, look, it validates itself.
Can I offer it as a quick takeaway?
Okay, real quick.
Very quick. I think one party is trying to protect our democracy, and one party is trying to attack the agencies that are.
That's your opinion. Absolutely, you can own your opinion, but I hope that we're all looking at the facts, because no matter which party this would happen with, it's a problem.
What actually happened is what's got to be.
Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say their agenda, once considered radical, is now mainstream in their party. Wow. Why that claim is raising concern among some Democrats and boosting Republican spirits. Stay close. I love a good debate. Well, socialists, darling Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders saying their agenda and ideas, like Medicare for all and a guaranteed living wage, are now mainstream within the Democratic Party. Here they are at rallies in Kansas and Missouri last week.
The ideas that we campaigned on, which a few years ago were seen to be radical ideas, are now mainstream ideas because of your support.
Power panel back, Kevin McCullough and Tiffany Cross. Tiffany, I'll start with you. How is it in the Democratic Party that you get a socialist agenda taking hold?
So I really think this is a narrative being pushed by Republicans. I don't think that
You don't think that she's a socialist? She calls herself one.
Yes, but I think that what they're pushing for, I think the word socialist will scare a lot of people, and that's why you hear a lot of people on the right.
That's what she is.
Well, I think a lot of people on the right are pushing it because they know it will scare a lot of people. But what she's calling for really isn't that inconsistent with what Democrats are calling for. I don't think it's so outrageous to call for Medicare for all, free college tuition, a $15 minimum wage.
Where's all that money going to come from?
I think there is.
It's going to be redistributed?
Well, if we have $12 million to pay for the president's military parade, I'm sure we could find some money to pay for free college tuition for all people and Medicare for all people.
Kevin?
Well, I do think that the Democrats have a dilemma on their hands for November, and I think that right now it's kind of like what the Tea Party and the pro-Trump people were dealing with establishment a few years ago. You've got people like Joe Crowley, who got bounced in the 14th Democratic primary. He's fighting back now. He's on the working party's line. He's going to try to take Cortez's seat or her nomination away from her. But look, there's a battle for the soul. Are they going to be a socialist-leaning kind of party that really Obama kind of paved the way for? Or are they going to be more of the traditional Rust Belt Union family kind of Democrats that still go to church? They're not into abortion and gay marriage and all this other stuff. They just want a few protections from government.
Let
Which
me
side
step
of
in
that
here.
wins
There's
that
some people called independents
November.
that both parties really want.
Right.
So you laid it out there, Kevin, and you did too, Tiffany. So how do you get those votes? Do you think they're going to embrace socialism?
Well, again, when you say socialism, I think most people...
It's not my word. They're democratic socialists.
Yes, I understand that, Harris. I'm not arguing that they're not democratic socialists.
But you're telling me the word is scary.
But I'm saying the collective you, not you, Harris. When people hear socialism, most people, if you ask the average American on the street, what does socialism mean? They don't know. If you talk to the average independent voter and say, hey, would you support a candidate who wants to give you Medicare? Would you support a candidate who supports a $15 minimum wage? Would you support
She wants to abolish ICE. Do you support that?
I don't support abolishing ICE just because I think as long as you have this administration in place, getting rid of ICE isn't going to change that many policies. But I do think there are a number of people who do support that call. I don't think that's such a scary thing. We survived a long time without ICE. ICE is only 15 years old. I don't think that's what Republicans can hang their argument on, why these candidates are so scary. I really think it's Republicans who are concerned that she's gaining such national
So when Tiffany says that this word socialism has people running for the hills and that it's scary, what do you say?
Well, I don't think that that's necessarily true, and I think that a lot of the elites on the politically left, center-left scale like democratic socialism. So I think your celebrities, I think your academic elites, I think they embrace the Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez's kind of ideas, and they're going to give them a little bit of a boost just in welcoming them to their fundraisers and their wine and cheese parties and all the other stuff. One other thing. Bernie Sanders got ripped off in 2016, and his supporters are ticked, and they haven't forgotten about it. There's a reason why she was able to knock Mr. Crowley out of his seat in New York 14. It's because there's an anger within that base that is real. And if the mainstream Democrats don't recognize that, they're going to have a real battle for the soul come November, and that only benefits the Republicans.
All right, I'll bring you both back. And just to add to this conversation, Ocasio-Cortez, as you were talking about, Joe Crowley's name is still on the ballot. He says he supports her. We'll see how it plays out. We'll run the facts on that. Thank you both. We're awaiting the White House press briefing. And in addition to that, a little bit of an announcement coming up, too. So stay close.
We'll give them to some of the farmers here. But I want to thank you and welcome everybody to the White House for the second annual Made in America Showcase. Made in America, Made in the USA. What do you like better? Huh? Made in the USA, Made in America? Both pretty good. Both pretty good. I remember when I was growing up, I'd see Made in America all over the place. A little bit Made in the USA, but Made in America. Everything had Made in America. And we're starting that again, and it's happening again, as you know. We're here today to celebrate the greatest products in the world, products made with American heart, American sweat, and American pride. We're thrilled to showcase incredible American-made goods from all 50 states. We have snowboards from Colorado. Where's a snowboard person? Those were nice snowboards. 10 years ago, I was perfect. Now, I don't know. I'm not such. Beautiful job. Cowboy boots from Texas. Where's cowboy boots? I like those boots. I like those boots. Baseball bats from Pennsylvania. I used to play baseball. Good. Boats, cars, spaceship. You know about the spaceship. And in case you hadn't noticed, there's an F-35 stealth fighter outside, and it's beautiful, parked on the south lawn. I guess getting it here, I know it didn't land on the south lawn, but it's something very special. It's can't see it. Where's Lockheed? Maryland, yeah. It's incredible. I went to one of the pilots. I was saying, how do you compare this with a certain other plane from the enemy? They said, well, the difference is when we fight, they can't see our plane. I said, that sounds like a pretty big advantage, right? It's called stealth, super stealth. All of these products have something special, very much in common. A big, beautiful seal, and that's with the sign, in this case, made in the USA. Also joining us today and at the event is NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Where's Jim? Jim, thank you. Jim, thank you. And Marilyn, thank you for being here from Lockheed Martin. After many years of decline, American manufacturing is coming back bigger and better and stronger than ever before. It's happening. We're in the midst of a great economic revival in the United States. We've added 3.7 million new jobs since the election, including more than 370,000 in manufacturing alone. Remember, during the campaign, they all said, oh, you're never going to add manufacturing jobs. That's obsolete, they would say. I said, it's obsolete? To make things is obsolete? I guess they were wrong, right? I guess they were wrong. We're adding a lot more. Almost 1 million workers discouraged by the policies of the previous administration and, frankly, other administrations have now returned to the workforce. New unemployment claims are at the lowest level in almost half a century. Think of that. The lowest level unemployment claims. That's a big one. Unemployment rates for Americans, for African Americans and Hispanics and Asians. Americans, all of us, lowest ever. These are the lowest levels for African Americans, for Hispanics, and for Asians ever recorded. Think of that, ever recorded. And women, unemployment recently reached the 65-year low. We think that's probably the lowest ever. But as I've been saying, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it will be. It'll be the lowest in history. Pretty bad when you say the lowest in 65 years. And I say that's not as good as history. So, but very shortly it will be. We'll be saying history. Manufacturing wages are expected to rise at the fastest rate in more than 17 years. And 95% of American manufacturers, which I love, that's what we love, is manufacturers, are optimistic about the future. That's the highest level ever recorded, 95%. We have achieved together in the last 18 months something that is totally unprecedented. For decades, the United States allowed other countries to steal our jobs, close our factories, and plunder our wealth. What was happening was horrible. I used to talk about it for 20 years in the private sector. I said, how did they let this happen? Little did I know I'd get my shot. That's what happened. And that's what's happening to us, because it's really been positive. Our leaders in Washington did nothing. They did nothing. They let our factories leave. They let our people lose their jobs, given to other jobs, workers in faraway lands. That's not free trade. That's fool's trade. That's stupid trade. And we don't do that kind of trade anymore. The European Union's been very tough on the United States, but they're coming in to see me on Wednesday. And we'll see if we can work something out. And otherwise, we'll have to do something with respect to the millions of cars that they send in every year. But maybe we can work something out. They're all coming in, the top people. We're talking to China, who had a $375 billion trade surplus last year with the United States. They were $375 billion, or looking at it differently, we had a $375 billion trade deficit. That's not good. And we're talking to China very seriously. We're talking to Mexico on NAFTA. And I think we're going to have something worked out. The new president, terrific person. I spoke to him at length on a call, did a great job, got a tremendous vote, and they have a lot of confidence in him in Mexico, and that's good. But we're talking to them about doing something very dramatic, very positive for both countries. We're demanding fairness with the World Trade Organization. It's been a disaster for the United States, and we want fairness. We'd lose court cases. We always had a minority of judges. They gave us fewer judges than other countries had. And with lose cases, nobody knew why. I said, I know why. Because you don't have judges from this country. You'd have a minority, 3-2, with 3 being on the other side. And we've started to do much better lately in winning cases. But America never waves the white flag. We only wave the red, white, and blue flag. The era of economic surrender for the United States is over. It's over. And you people have been really leading the charge. America is fighting back, and we're winning again. You know my story about winning. We're going to win so much, you'll get tired of winning. I don't think you're going to get tired. Throughout our history, our greatest leaders, Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Lincoln, McKinley. People don't know too much about McKinley. Take a look. It was an really incredible economic time for our country. People wanted to come in and take from our country. They had to pay for it. They had to pay for the privilege of taking from our country. We all understood that to be strong, and every one of them, our nation, that we really had to be a manufacturing nation. You have to be able to be a manufacturing nation. I'm very proud to say that our steel industry is coming back at a level that nobody thought possible. Factories are opening up all over. No matter where I'm going, they're saying, you know, we just opened up a steel plant that was closed for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years in some cases. U.S. Steel now is opening up 6 plants, and they're expanding in other plants. And we're very proud of that. But we were being dumped on. You know what that means? We're being dumped on. They were dumping all over this country. And now our steel industry is coming back. And you need a steel industry. That's not like a normal thing where you make even some of your products, which I love, but it's not steel. We need steel. We need it in case of an emergency of the wrong kind. My administration is reclaiming our proud manufacturing heritage because we are finally putting, again, America first. We're tearing down barriers to our exports, protecting our intellectual property, and defending our companies from unfair foreign trade practices, of which there are many. We're putting the trade cheaters on notice. No one rips off the United States of America anymore. It's happened too much for too long, and stopping. To give you a level playing field, we've cut record numbers of regulations. In the history of our country, nobody's cut more regulations than me, and I've only been here for less than 2 years. So I'm talking about 2 years, 4 years, 16 years, 8 years. Doesn't matter how long they're here. We've cut more regulations than any other president, and we've just been here for shorter than 2 years. We passed the biggest tax cut and reform in American history. We've gotten rid of the individual mandate from health care, which was a disaster for you and your businesses, where people had to pay for the privilege of not having to pay to get bad health care. Sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty basic. You pay for not having to buy. And a lot of people wondered about that one. That's gone. That's a big thing. That's gone. That was the most unpopular element of Obamacare. And Obamacare is very rapidly fading away. We had it done, but we missed it by 1 vote. Somebody changed their mind in the middle of the evening. Wonder who that was. But just one of those things. But we're very far progressed. And we're now opening up health care policies and making it possible for people to buy great health care at a low cost. And we're very proud of that. And it's opened. Secretary of Labor Acosta has done an incredible job. And Secretary Azar is in the process of doing something that's going to be very big. And all of you people will be big beneficiaries of that in the business world also. Since our tax cuts were passed, more than 6 million Americans have received a bonus or a pay raise, in some cases a very substantial bonus, and they're really liking it. Creating over $7 trillion of worth for our country. We vaulted up to a very strong #1 position. We're the largest in the world, largest economy in the world.
All right, the president there saying the era of economic surrender for the United States is over. This is a manufacturing event, his second since he's been president at the White House. The White House lawn is decorated, if you will, with made in America products, including a Never Summer snowboard from my home state of Colorado, and things like an F-35 stealth fighter, also a space capsule. Out there on the lawn of the White House, one item from each manufacturer in each of the 50 states. The president there touting that the steel industry is coming back and saying that African American and Hispanic unemployment in this country is at historic levels. Let's get back to that report from our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge. She's live with news that the Paul Manafort trial has been delayed till the end of July. But also, Catherine, wanted to get your take on the White House talking about taking away security clearances from some former officials.
Okay, for some context, many people leave the government with clearances if they leave under good circumstances, like they resign, or if they're a political appointee, they're replaced, and they use that clearance to help with their consultancy work after they leave government. So losing your clearance really dings your ability to earn money after you've left the government. You know, by example, when FBI lawyer Lisa Page and Agent Peter Strzok left the FBI or were forced out of the FBI, they lost their clearances as well, which had to be restored in order for them to give those depositions in a closed session to the two House committees. The other thing that I would say is that we're really in uncharted territory, because in the 17 years that I've covered the intelligence community here in Washington, I've never seen a group of former intelligence officials be so public, so open in their political views after they have left office. Typically, people go sort of quietly into the night to retirement or to do consultancy work, but maybe it's the impact of social media, the impact of Twitter, or the lure of working as TV pundits, if you will, as specialists in this area. But I haven't really seen a group as so outspoken in public about their political views as we have during the last couple of years. But many things, as you know, have been unprecedented since this president took office, John.
Well, let's talk about some of the names here. John Brennan, the former director of the CIA. Jim Comey, the former FBI director. Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, and Susan Rice, President Obama's national security advisor for a time. There are a couple of others on the list as well. Is it possible? I mean, is it possible to characterize this as anything other than, you know, a kind of a brushback by the White House, or are there, you know, is there more than revenge at work here?
Well, I don't think it's my position really to speculate on whether it was appropriate or whether it amounted to retaliation. But what I can tell you in a very factual way is that I cannot remember a time when former senior intelligence officials have been so open in public about their political views that relate to ongoing investigations. In this case, the Russia case. Of the group that was mentioned by Sarah Sanders at the podium, the one that is kind of not like the others, or doesn't seem to fit, is Susan Rice. Susan Rice has not really been leaning forward in the same way the others have in terms of television appearances or the messages in which she has communicated her political views on developments on Twitter. Just, you know, it's important to note that it was after Helsinki that the former CIA director John Brennan very publicly on Twitter said that this was treasonous behavior. I think those were close to his words. And then he repeated the same claims on television. So there was really no mystery as to where he stood on that news conference and the president's decision making.
That said, Susan Rice was heavily involved in the unmasking of names that is part of this FISA warrant thing that is so bubbling through Washington right now.
She was, and she has argued in testimony on the Hill that this was part of her job and that she had deep concerns about some of these Russian contacts or associated contacts leading up to the campaign. Her personal feelings on that, though, she has not broadcast on Twitter, at least not to my knowledge, John.
Catherine Herridge, good reporting as always. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Back to President Trump's tough talk on Iran. President moments ago asked if he is concerned about provoking tensions with that country. His response next. President Trump issues a threat to Iran. It's not the first time he's talked tough like this. Last year, President Trump threatened North Korea with fire and fury, but ended up having a summit with Kim Jong-un. Today, the White House would not say whether President Trump would be open to meeting Iran's leader. The Fox Business Network's Christina Partsinevelos is live at the White House for us now. Christina.
Right. And just moments ago, when President Trump was giving a tour on the front lawn, he was asked specifically about the tensions with Iran and if he was concerned about it. And he said, I quote, not at all. He is not at all concerned with the escalating tensions between both countries. And what do I mean by escalating tensions? You have Iran, the president of Iran, just on Sunday, yesterday, putting out a speech stating that, if anything, Iran is the mother of all peace and war with Iran is the mother of all wars. So you had President Trump that responded to that in a tweet in all capital letters, which we understand as to be yelling in the online world. And let's get to that tweet. Trump tweeted exactly that: never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the like of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. His tweet was further reinforced by Mike Pompeo, who spoke yesterday at an event in Washington. Mike Pompeo it's pretty much said that, if anything, Iran is run by the mafia and there's corruption within the economy there. Then this morning you had comments from Bolton, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. He said that Iran, or any country that essentially reacts negatively to the United States, will pay a price. Those words are also reflected with Sarah Sanders, press secretary. She spoke earlier in a press briefing, and she also said that the tensions have escalated, but that they're still trying to mitigate it. And I think right before you threw to me, you were talking about whether Iran and the United States will ever have a chance to meet. About a month ago, the president said he's still waiting for a phone call from Iran to make a deal, and maybe they can make a deal. Iran media, though, is stating that they're not looking to meet the United States.
And the Iranian response to the president has been to sort of poo-poo and maybe even belittle what he has had to say.
Exactly. They have their state media over there, and within the last 24 hours, they've pretty much said, hey, you know, this is no big deal. We are going to go about our business. However, if you speak to Iranian people, and this is being covered by the international press, they're worried because the economy is being hit. You have the United States in May that pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. Then the United States also put forward or proposed several economic sanctions. This is hurting the Iranian economy. And then so you have Iran that's retaliating, saying that we will close off the Strait of Hormuz if you decide to play war with us. And so why that certain area? Because a lot of oil passes through that canal, and if they cut it off, that could deplete a lot of the supply of oil around the globe. Just because of these talks, you've seen the price of oil as climbed very high, well above $70 US a barrel just over the little while. So it's had a ripple effect across the entire globe when it comes to the price of oil. And when that price of oil is higher, that means it's more expensive for companies. So there's a lot of back and forth between both countries, and still no conclusion as to whether they're going to discuss a deal, talk about improving the economic situation, but you just have tweets for the moment.
Christina Partsinevelos, Fox Business Network there at the White House. Christina, thank you. So coming up, we're going to examine what appear to be some threats from the White House to revoke the security clearances of former officials, primarily from the Obama administration. We'll talk about it with a former Bush White House personnel member right after this. All right, right after this show, you can catch me on Facebook Watch for a Fox News update. Want to tell you about the situation that we just heard from Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, who says that the White House is considering revoking the security clearances of several members of the Obama administration and others, including former CIA director, as well as John Brennan, as well as James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence. Let's talk about it with Teresa Payton. She was the White House Chief Information Officer under President George W. Bush, now CEO of Fortalice Solutions, which helps protect businesses and government agencies from cyber attacks. Teresa, the idea that the White House would revoke those security clearances, or might, how does that strike you?
Well, it's one of those things where obviously if you're not still working on a classified program, you get read off, and that's a procedure that's done. But these particular individuals, they've been on the front lines of the global cyber war. They speak from experience. And at this point, I just don't feel like we can afford to lose their institutional knowledge, especially at this time where Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea are all flexing their cyber muscles in different ways. So we definitely need to make sure we're able to keep their institutional knowledge, the fact that they know who to call, they know from experience, from mistakes made, for things that went right, how to handle these tough situations.
In short, you think it would be a bad idea to revoke their clearances?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should look at sort of the knowledge that they have, what they have to offer, keep their clearances intact, and tap into them on sort of that need-to-know basis.
But the idea that they've been out there criticizing the president or criticizing the White House, using, some of the information that they may have developed from their clearances as a result of their clearances, that doesn't sit too well with President Trump.
And I can understand him feeling that way, but, sometimes the best cybersecurity policy and countermeasures we've come up with in this country were based on having healthy levels of disagreement around how to go about executing actions and countermeasures based on the intelligence gathered. And so this is the time that we should be, even if there's disagreement and an agreement to disagree, we should be hearing all different points of view and considering those. And so I could see where he would feel like them criticizing his policy is not helpful, but we need to continue to have a dialogue about why do they feel the way that they do and turn their intellect and their experiences into the action plans and the countermeasures this country desperately needs.
Teresa Payton, CEO at Fortalice Solutions, formerly with the Bush White House. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. That's going to do it for today. I'm John Scott, in for Shepard Smith. We'll continue to keep an eye on this threat, if you will, from the White House to revoke the security clearances of those 6 people whose names and faces you just saw on the screen. Many of them worked in the Obama White House, some in the Bush White House. Your World with Neil Cavuto is next.
There is a serious problem with the FBI presenting to the Fisa court an application for a search warrant against a United States citizen, and then followed by 3 renewals when they were basing it on a very flawed document, the so-called Steele dossier that has never been verified.
That, of course, Bob Goodlatte, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Judicial Watch has been at the forefront of getting the FBI to release the Fisa warrant. Chris Farrell, the Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch, joins us now. Chris, good to have you here. Congratulations to you, to Judicial Watch, for the important work that you always do for the country. But in this specific instance, we're deeply appreciative because it goes to the very heart of what we've been talking about on this broadcast from the incipient point of the Trump administration.
Thanks, Lou. What we've seen, what we now have documented, is gross misconduct. I'll call it what it is. It's criminal misconduct on the part of senior FBI agents and officials, attorneys on their staff, as well as Department of Justice officials. They knowingly and willingly provided false and misleading evidence to a Foreign Intelligence Service court to have them sign off to conduct what's really a legal coup against President Trump. It's just that simple.
It is that simple. It is that complex. It's that awful. The corruption is, I'm still somewhat irritated at this point that the leaders of the House and the Senate speak in velvet terms and tones about what is a corrupt and toxic level of corruption at the FBI and the Justice Department, who have condoned as well as created a special counsel that has no foundation, in fact, in probable cause, in any evidence whatsoever. And yet we are watching this thing go on and on and on to the detriment of governance in this country, to impeding the President of the United States and his administration. When in the world, what will it take to end this nightmare?
The corrosive effect of someone as corrupt as Rosenstein, who's a fact witness with respect to the foundation of the creation or the appointment of Mueller as counsel and the firing of Comey, he's disqualified at face value. And this sort of abusive process, this abuse of the FISA system or the FISA courts, the submission of this phony warrant application and the underlying affidavit, which is deeply flawed and outright false, the long-term consequences for this is a denigration, a minimizing of faith and trust in the Justice Department and our courts. Don't you? In the long term, this is the path to a failed state. Let me be very clear. You can't keep going this way and pretend that, oh, well, we'll bounce back, it'll be okay. It's not.
When are we going to rip out the influence of the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, and the people it owns, like Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell? The list goes on. They have more company than not in both the House and the Senate. It is a corrupt and flawed government that we're looking at today. President Trump campaigned from 2015 on, talking about he was not owned by anybody. Meanwhile, nearly everyone that he stood up and gave his first address to the nation in the House chamber are owned. They're bought and sold almost daily for one thing or the other. And I don't know what the number is. Is it 50% of them? I don't know. But I can tell you every aspect of this government now needs careful examination. And what do we have to do? The Fourth Estate is no longer reliable because they've sold out to the corrupt, the toxic corruption of both parties and their ideologies, particularly the left.
I can tell you that with respect to the establishment, big capital E establishment, whether it's Democratic or Republican, right, they're terrified of Mr. Trump. They're
well, that's why they're trying to kill him.
He can't be bought. They'll do everything they can to undermine him personally and his presidency, and there's no better evidence, at least this one first exhibit of multiple pieces that Judicial Watch is going to obtain, than this FISA warrant with respect to Carter Page. It's phonied up. It's transparent. It's a pathetic piece of legal work. And I want to know the name of the supervisory special agent who signed that underlying affidavit. He's hiding under a redaction right now, but we're going to find out who it is.
That's interesting. The judges of the FISA court system turn out to be no better than the agents whose work is so flawed and the Justice Department attorneys who are so corrupt, politically corrupt. I mean, it's unimaginable. When we knew for sure and for certainty that the top levels of the FBI were corrupt. We knew that the top levels of justice were corrupt. But I've heard too many people say that the rank and file of the Justice Department, the rank and file of the FBI isn't. And I have to tell you, none of these documents in the field work that either was or was not carried out doesn't leave anyone with confidence in the integrity of the institution of the FBI or the U.S. Justice Department.
And look, the fish rots from the head down, and at a certain point, even the rank and file becomes either negligent or complicit. There comes a point when you realize what your leadership is doing, the games they're playing, the way they're abusing the process and their authority, and you can't say that it doesn't have an impact on the overall organization. And that is the larger, deeper problem. This is a corrosive course of conduct. It's criminality, and it's going to have an impact on the country. We've got to address it and fix it now.
So how do we do
it?
How do we do it, Chris? I mean, we have been talking about this. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've already said that there should be an investigative division created within the U.S. Marshal Service. The FBI needs to be collapsed in on itself. Agents who are interested in joining that new investigative division of the Marshal Service need to be vetted, and then they would lateral over. And the FBI, as we know it, needs to go away. It has zero credibility. People in the country don't trust. They're watching what's going on. They're seeing this abuse of authority and this corruption, and they've lost their integrity. They've lost their the authenticity or the genuineness of what they once were.
I want to just go to, and it has to be, I think, something, whether the prescription that you're laying out or whether something equally or perhaps even more dramatic and drastic has to be done, because I don't know how we recover from this. Anyone who cares about this country, who cares about their families, their children, their grandchildren, this is not an institution, the Department of Justice, that you want to have anything to do with being responsible for the enforcement of laws that work against the American citizen, that works against decency and honor and fidelity to the Constitution. This is as low a point as one could have imagined, even in the darkest days of Watergate. Do you agree?
I do. There has been no greater documented abuse of authority, abuse of process, to deliberately target a candidate and then a president than what we've seen right now. This is an outrage that goes beyond the pale of anything in our modern political history. There's nothing like it.
I just want to understand, get your understanding of how it is a FISA court judge, no, not one, but a number of FISA court judges, could,
four of them in this case, yes,
could abandon the basic elementary rigors required of them under the FISA law, under the procedure of their court, and how anyone could stand in front of them and represent the Steele dossier as sufficient evidence to carry out surveillance of a presidential candidate, for crying out loud, and his campaign.
Well, the process itself is, the procedure is built on not just identifying the facts and answering all the basic interrogatives of why you've met the probable cause threshold, but it's also based on trust in this case. FISA courts are a little bit different. The Justice Department and the FBI come in and they make representations and they swear to it. And so the judge has to rely upon that documentation. Now, you can poke holes in it and ask questions, but they papered this thing up in a way that is outrageous. And frankly, it should have drawn a little intellectual curiosity from the judge, particularly when they abandoned source number one, who we now know or believe is Christopher Steele. And they say, well, yeah, we had to cut him loose as a source, but we still buy all the stuff that he's given us. And then the recycling of the story through Michael Isikoff and Yahoo News. Yeah. This is a transparent fraud on the court.
It's a fraud on the courts, and it was carried out by the Obama Justice Department, the Obama FBI. It is a disgrace what we are witnessing here, what has been confirmed. And again, because of the diligence and the efforts of Judicial Watch, we have the documents, over 400 pages of them today. Chris Farrell, as always, great to have you with us. Thank you. With us tonight, Andrew McCarthy, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, National Review contributing editor, Fox Business contributor. Great to have you with us. A terrific article in addressing this issue of the corruption that surrounded the FISA process, whether it be the FBI, the Justice Department, or the judges, in this case, of the FISA courts. It's got to be deeply painful for you. You spent so much of your time, your career, and your energy prosecuting the bad guys, and to find out there's so many bad guys in today's FBI, today's Justice Department, and the FISA courts. These are bad guys.
Well, what I feel worst about is that having done national security work, what you come to appreciate is, number one, there's many things that are more important than criminal procedures.
Right.
And number two, you can't really protect the country unless you can do certain things like keep secrets,
right.
Be able to take actions that need to be taken in order to protect the country. And there's secrecy that's attendant to all of that. And what that ends up meaning is if we're going to have national security, the apparatus of the country that handles intelligence and that kind of stuff has to be able to look the public in the eye and say, you can trust us. And when things like this happen, what I always get afraid of is that the public is going to, number one, say, why should we trust you? I worry that the powers that we actually need to have to protect the country are going to be pried back because people show themselves not to be worthy of them. And that's when bad stuff happens. I mean, that's when you become vulnerable.
We've had such bad things, though, happen, Andy, whether it's September 11th, whether it is a war against Iraq, when the perpetrators were in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. We have had 3 successive administrations that lied to us, that were incompetent. They were every bit as incompetent as they were corrupt. The Obama administration, it will live in infamy for what it did just in one instance, and that with, of course, the nuclear deal with Iran. This is, and by the way, a second horror would be what the president who failed to enforce a red line that resulted in 5 million refugees out of Syria and set off a cataclysm in Europe. But the reality here seems to be that the people should never trust their government. There should never be absolute trust. Well, there should always be a questioning media. There should always be a questioning public and citizenry.
I've always thought, Lou, that the genius of the system is that, and the framers were ingenious in this way, we don't rely on the good faith and honor of the people who hold public office. We hope to get it. We hope that we are going to elect virtuous people. But what actually the system is based on is this idea that nobody can be trusted and everybody's got to be checked and watched. And
so where's the check on the FBI?
Well, the problem, I worry that the checks and balances in the system are designed for a system that's more modest than the one that we now have.
Smaller government.
Well,
part of it.
It doesn't need to be small, but it needs to be limited in the sense that we want it to be big in the big things we need it to do, but it's got to be checked. It has to be checked.
For example, I don't understand how people can talk about the number of FBI agents we have.
Right. About 13,000 or thereabouts.
And you got 30,000 within the Department of Justice. Right. But think back to when we were in a life and death struggle with Marxist-Leninism and the Soviet Union. How many fewer we had, and how much more effective they were. And what have we got now? We have an unquestioning acceptance of an FBI. No one knows what the heck they do in law enforcement anymore because they don't do much. In point of fact, they have interposed themselves, as has the Homeland Security Department, between the first responders, that is local law enforcement, where they used to be in support of law enforcement. It is a screw-up of massive proportions. Add to that to the toxic corruption that is represented throughout justice and FBI. It's horrifying.
Well, one of the arguments I always made against the idea of treating national security problems like terrorism as if they were law enforcement problems is the only way you can bring those problems into the system is by eviscerating the line that used to be a pretty bright line between what really is law enforcement, criminal procedure, and what you need other measures for. And that's a big part of what we've lost.
In support of what you're saying, it's almost as if the FBI, and taking them as the example, and they're not, unfortunately, alone in this example, but because of a significant portion of their resources and manpower being devoted to national security issues, that they have somehow taken the trappings of all of that and applied it to their conduct and their operations and their procedures, in which should remain secretive. Law enforcement has taken a back seat. Their activity within the body politic, they're not involved, frankly, in criminal illegal immigrants either being arrested or tried. They're on some sort of secret mission all of their own. The FBI has become unrecognizable in its lack of values. The institution has just torn itself to pieces. And by the way, 3 successive presidents who presided over that.
Well, let me just speak up, though, for my own experience, which has always been that whatever was going on in headquarters, the rank and file of the FBI has always been very effective and tried to go about its business in a
untainted by
way.
Headquarters.
No, not untainted by them, but sometimes fighting tooth and nail against headquarters.
When I say untainted, and I can see you with your heart reaching out to the old institution that you serve, and we appreciate that. But smallest people imaginable that we could have at the top of those once storied institutions. They have become a blight on this society, a burden on our people and against citizens, and we don't know where the national security interests rest because, frankly, those intelligence agencies that include the FBI have so skewered it that there is just, I don't know if it's ever retrievable.
Well, the only way what's called the swamp can be undone is if we get Congress back into being an actual Congress that checks executive excess, that's for sure.
I think Chris Farrell has got it exactly right. I think you've got to take apart the FBI because as long as they are there, the deep state is armed and dangerous. Andy McCarthy, thank you.